This diagram illustrates the standard marketing model. Highly targeted content pushes consumers down a funnel, culminating in brand loyalty. But empirical data shows this sequence breaks down at high volumes. Instead of loyalty, aggressive tactics provoke direct negative customer engagement. Users subjected to these optimizing tactics are intentionally avoiding brands, publishing open criticisms, and generating negative word of mouth. The evidence points to a predictable psychological response to crossing a specific cognitive threshold. Beyond this point, the intensity of the content triggers the reaction, regardless of how well the algorithm targeted the user. In a highly saturated digital environment, campaigns engineered to maximize interaction can inadvertently manufacture brand adversaries. This is a 2026 study by researchers Li Yang and Yanfeng Kai, examining consumer backlash on the Chinese platform Douyin. The authors analyzed survey data from 510 active Douyin users, employing a statistical technique known as partial least squares structural equation modeling, or PLS-SEM. Their analysis tests a specific thesis: standard marketing content operates as an environmental stressor. Over time, continuous exposure to this content triggers a psychological chain reaction that ends in overt hostility toward the brand. By mapping this statistical pathway, strategists can quantify exactly how highly optimized campaigns fail. To trace the pathway to user backlash, we use the author's structural equation model. It begins with two inputs. First is remunerative content, emphasizing financial incentives and time-limited discounts. Second is relational content, engineered to evoke emotional resonance through brand storytelling. The researchers evaluated these inputs using the stressor-strain-outcome, or SSO, framework. This psychological model evaluates how external demands challenge a person's adaptive capacity. The SSO framework treats promotional discounts and narrative storytelling as environmental demands. When thousands of brands compete fiercely for attention on a single platform, their combined messaging places continuous pressure on the user's cognitive environment. The content becomes an external stressor, overwhelming the user through the sheer volume of informational demands. This table provides the raw statistical proof of that pressure. It displays a direct correlation between exposure to marketing content and psychological tension. Translating this data into the model, the external stressors trigger an internal psychological strain known as social FOMO. The study confirms the strength of these triggers. Remunerative content drives social FOMO with a coefficient of 0.278, and relational content follows closely at 0.259. While the statistical strength is similar, the psychological mechanisms differ. Remunerative content creates anxiety over missing out on time-limited financial rewards. Relational content amplifies a user's fear of social exclusion from a community. Whether a brand relies on aggressive discounts or narrative storytelling, the underlying tactic mathematically provokes user anxiety. To understand why this anxiety is destructive, we apply the conservation of resources theory. This principle states that humans have a finite pool of psychological and cognitive energy. It requires sustained emotional vigilance to constantly monitor time-sensitive deals and socially salient content. This hyperconnection actively depletes a user's finite psychological resources. As those resources drain, the user enters a state of social media fatigue, a condition characterized by severe emotional exhaustion and cognitive overload. The data shows this is not a mild correlation. The study links social FOMO directly to fatigue. With a path coefficient of 0.497, this represents the strongest statistical relationship in the entire study. Social FOMO is a chronic stressor that systematically drains user capacity until the system breaks down. Fatigue is an internal psychological state, but it dictates the user's external behavior. Direct negative customer engagement is an emotionally charged retaliatory response. Users actively seek to penalize the brands they hold responsible for their exhaustion. Completing the structural model links this internal state of fatigue directly to external hostility. The study yields a beta coefficient of 0.449 for this final step. The exhaustion forces the hostility. Exhausted users often pivot from passive disengagement to active retaliation, using their remaining energy to attack the brands they perceive as the source. This unbroken chain is called serial mediation. It proves these variables don't act independently. They trigger one another in a strict sequential order. This final table confirms the full mediation pathway. The data tracks the sequence from exposure to remunerative or relational content straight through to direct negative customer engagement. The findings confirm a unified theory. Ostensibly engaging marketing messages operate sequentially as psychological stressors, then as emotional strains, and finally as behavioral triggers. This sequence indicates that what begins as a discount or community story increases the likelihood of public brand avoidance if pushed beyond sustainable limits. The dark side of customer engagement is not an accident of algorithm design. It is a statistically predictable consequence of cognitive overload. Maximizing exposure, urgency, and interactivity fails in a highly saturated digital ecosystem. The core strategic design principle derived from this research is emotional sustainability. Content strategies must be designed to safeguard a user's psychological well-being. Strategists must recognize the strict neurological limits of persuasive communication. Prioritizing the short-term gains of FOMO-driven marketing creates a long-term reputational risk by manufacturing a fatigued, hostile user base. To cultivate long-term brand equity, strategists must stop optimizing for the breaking point of human attention and start designing for cognitive endurance.